Hi, my name is Monty Mully. It's Russ Winters. We're from a company here in town called If Then. We are our pedigree goes back to Turner Broadcasting Systems, and at If Then we do a lot of work with media companies because of that. So today we're going to give you a little discussion about how we've deployed Drupal, generically speaking, in some of our larger media clients, which is generally speaking, a little bit more complicated setup than maybe generic marketing stuff. So these are some of our clients. You can see that the Drupal drop identifies some of the clients that we've had that use Drupal. There's a fair number of media clients in this mix, but we also have some marketing clients that use Drupal as well. In our particular company, we specialize in media. About 2/3, maybe 70% of our business is in media clients. So Russ here is going to take you into some depth in how we integrate with a wide range of external systems, but this is generally speaking the stack that we use. Obviously, we don't use every one of these pieces of software for every client that we work with. And you'll notice here that in some of these in particular, there's software that is really unique to the media business. For example, the ad serving software, DoubleClick. There's some other video ad serving software that we work with. FreeWill, for example, it's not on here. We'll mix and match these based on the situation, and also for our media clients, they tend to have pretty sophisticated technical teams, so they have tastes already in place about what software they want us to integrate with. So we have to accommodate that as well. So just to give you a little taste of the jungle that is the media ecosystem, this is a slide that we have two versions of our slides to describe what the landscape is like working inside the media space. This is one that describes some of the business arrangements and technical interactions in there. So if you look at over here on the left side of the screen here, this is where content comes from. We'll talk about that in some more detail before, but it can come from things like studios, it can come from wire services, it can come from data feeds. And then the media company is going to land over here. In some cases, it goes to the broadcast side of our network. So if you think of companies like National Geographic or Broadcasting, they have broadcast operations. So some of their information is coming in that direction. And some of it fans off and goes down into digital production, sometimes going through network ops to get there, sometimes going directly into digital production. And then from these two places, it fans out. And on the top side here, in media companies, you have a lot of entities that specialize in distribution. Sometimes you'll hear these people called cable companies or MSOs or MVPDs. These are companies like AT&T, Comcast, Amazon that take content from programmers and then redistribute it to consumers in a variety of packages. So they have to feed all those different entities over there, and they consume content in different ways. Some of them consume it as linear networks, some of them consume it as video on demand, and some of them sell it as part of bigger packages, some of this the a la carte packages. Down here, down here you have a more pure digital side, so there are advertising networks in there. There's free ad-supported websites in there. There's subscription websites, things like the New York Times, Washington Post, places like that. Some of them have e-commerce systems you have to integrate with. And sometimes you have to integrate back and forth across between digital products and cable TV products through something called TV Everywhere, which is what you use to, when you try to watch NBC Live Extra Sunday Night Football, for example, where you have to authenticate to say that you have a valid cable subscription, right? And then it all gets distributed out to consumers. So that's the broad ecosystem. I forgot to point out there's also advertisers here, which are part of the money that drives this. What we're going to focus here is down digital side of this ecosystem today. Although as you can see, it touches a lot of different parts of it, and so that integration is part of the complexity of trying to implement Drupal inside this environment. And this is a drawing that we frequently use when we go into clients to help them get their heads around the infrastructure that they're building. What we want them to do is to think about their infrastructure, or their tool sets, their production processes as part of a value chain. And if there's a piece of infrastructure that's not adding value, we get rid of it. And so this is a very clear way for us to sort of edit out what they need to focus on and what they don't, and what the real value is that something is bringing us. So things start over here with content sources. And they can be, this is news, it could be sports, it could even be something like National Geographic or something like that. Any sort of digital publisher that has a constant flow of content here. And they have this original problem, which is to gather and organize all that content. Maybe put some metadata on it and stuff like that. That's part of the thing that we do. And then the next step on it is to transform that content into something that's consumable for users, right? So they get raw AP feeds, or they get raw data from sports scores or election results, or they get pictures from the field from National Geographic, and they have to take that and transform that into a useful, pleasant user experience. And then they have to, in most cases, layer and add inventory in there as well to get some value out of it. So all that process is that middle section, which is to transform, present it, and then take that presentation and deliver it to users. And then the last segment of the value chain is when they get that to the consumers, then they have to slice up those consumers, segment that audience, deliver that audience to advertisers who are paying them for access. So they really have two consumers here. They have the audience who's reading their content or viewing their content, and then they have the advertisers who are advertising to them, and they have to get both of those right. So what's going to happen here is Russ is going to take this over, and he's going to start to talk about how Drupal fits into this value chain. And there's a slide that we have that shows the parts of it. We'll just advance here so you can see what's going on here. So this corresponds to the external sources. So this side of this drawing here is the organize, and this side is the present side, and the users don't have to. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Russ, who many of you probably know from other camps.
I'm going to use this because that's what I've been using before. Cool. So, yeah, my mission here is to try to describe a little bit to you how Drupal fits into all of what Monty just talked about there, which is indeed complicated. And what I'll do is I'll kind of use this to go through some typical requirements that media companies kind of bring to the table for us and touch on, and I can only touch on some of the things we use to help meet those requirements. So let's just jump right in. I mean, everybody knows that Drupal 8 is awesome, or we wouldn't even be here at Drupal Camp, right? But there's no magic bullets in getting this done. Regardless of what tool you use, you have to do careful discovery on what the client is looking for. You got to have good planning and good solid development practices, because there's a lot of stakeholders in here. You saw the first diagram. There's a ton of stakeholders here that have their own goals and things. I mean, it's not like building a website for your brother's air conditioning company. There's a lot of things you have to do. So you can't skip the planning part. And, real good sites, they don't just come together at the last minute. I mean, this is something that requires a lot of hard work, and you got to work smart. And before you get started doing anything, you really need to understand all of these different competing requests and take care of, put it this way, you can't get started until you understand what the target is. So when the time is right, we know we can get a lot of mileage out of Drupal core and contributed modules, and with Drupal 8, I think it's even greater than it was before, just because of the object-oriented nature of Drupal. It makes it really easy to extend and add functionality to all that. Plus, it gives us the opportunity to write some really tight code. I mean, you could still have the option of going and writing 600 lines of crappy code in a hook somewhere, but you don't have to do that. I mean, you can write some really good stuff with the object-oriented nature of Drupal 8. And with service containers, plugins, events, I mean, all those things are really big game changers as far as how you approach your development. And then these guys, like the media companies that we're talking about, they come to the table knowing what they want. They don't, you can't kind of dictate to them what you're going to deliver to them. You have to deliver what they're asking for. So it's just, it brings some extra challenges in there, which you're going to hear me say planning a lot. I mean, that's where the planning comes in. So Let's kind of just go through some of the things that we get asked to do. This seems real simple. You know, we need a great website that's super fast and reliable. Well, that's a reasonable request. And the thing is for a fast and reliable site, this is not something that you can just wait until you're ready to launch to find out how your site performs. Something like performance is something you have to start working on. Everything you do from square one till the time you finish, you always have to be going back and asking yourself, am I helping or hurting performance when I put this together? And of course, in these big systems like this, you're always going to have a few layers of cache, which is great. But cache hides a lot of bad things. And in a setup where you've got a lot of editorial activity, you've got editors editing, photographers uploading stuff, you've got data coming in, data going out, cron jobs running, there's a lot of things that are happening behind that cache layer. So again, considering performance from square one is super important. You know, well-written code, and not just your PHP code, but JavaScript. I mean, you can have a poorly performing application because of bad JavaScript in the browser. You could be generating HTML that's got 20 classes on every tag, and just because you got caching running, if you've got crappy HTML, you've just cached the crappy HTML, and it's still not great. So you just got to always be paying attention to that. So when it comes to Drupal, though, we've got a lot of options here in terms of how we cache things in Drupal and how we invalidate that cache. The render API, pretty much anything that goes on a page goes through that render API. You pass it instructions to tell it how to cache and how to invalidate the cache. But we've got all these other layers of caching above us. And just because Drupal knows how to manage it, if an editor has some breaking news and they put it out there, they can't wait for an hour for Akamai to finally clear the cache. So that's where something like Purge module comes in. Purge module's got some other contributed modules that extend it to work with Akamai and Cloudflare and things like that. Some of these things are still, you know, kind of early in the development process. Drupal 8's been out a while, but there's still a lot of catching up to do for some of the contributed modules. Don't be afraid, too, when you're considering performance, don't be afraid to use profilers like Blackfire or New Relic, do load tests, things like that, because that's going to help you identify problem areas before, you know, so that you're not sitting here pouring over 10,000 lines of code trying to figure out where the problem is. So things like that are super helpful, and that's a lot going on right there. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play. We got a client whose favorite phrase is teamwork makes the dream work. It takes a lot of expertise to get this stuff done. So having one front-end guy trying to figure all this out is not going to be the right answer. You need some experts doing stuff like this. You can go ahead, Monty.
So one thing to note, you can overthink your cache. In most of our media clients, they have fairly high velocity updates. Some of them are updating, you know, almost minutely. Some of them, you know, many times a day. And the traffic to their site, is generally speaking, has high locality reference. It's going to a relatively small set of content. So we actually found this back from our Trevor database, that if you set these two caches out here, the CDNs, with fixed, short TTLs, you'll still get 99% hit rates in the cache, right? And you never have to think about it, which means your cache is always fresh. So you don't have to worry about purging because it's going to time out relatively quickly. And by short, we mean 30 seconds, 60 seconds cache time. And because you have such high locality reference, you still get very high hit rates. So it really simplifies things for you. It's the easiest and most efficient way of implementing these two caches out.
Good stuff. Now, since we are just touching on a lot of things and really scratching the surface of it, I have jammed this presentation full of links. So after each section here, there's going to be a lot of links. We've already uploaded this up to the Drupal campsite. So if you're interested in digging deeper into these things and finding out how they work, you're going to have a lot of jumping off points in the presentation itself. I'm going to generally just blow right by those, though. So we're talking to the client, and they say, hey, we need to have, our articles need to have a hero image, some text, an image, more text, a quote, a video, more text, all of which is optional and all of which can be arranged any way we want, no matter what. And it's got to be easy to use, and Susie can only do X, Johnny can only do Y, Tim can only do Z, but whatever it is, there's complicated requirements that come along. So in the realm of content authoring, the user experience for Drupal is not really that much different than it was in Drupal 6 and 7. It's pretty much adequate. It's better than a lot of things. It's not the most beautiful thing in the world out of the box, but it does get the job done. And there are things that we can do to improve that content authoring experience. I mean, right off the bat, you install something like Add Minimal, it's pretty already. You can build a sub-theme off of that and make it even better. Something like paragraphs directly addresses that first requirement of having flexibility in defining content. Paragraphs are just fieldable entities that you can define to handle one little chunk of content, like text or an image or a 3-up section of curated content, however you wanted to do it. And then those paragraphs can be attached to nodes as a multi-valued entity reference so that the user can then say, I want a piece of text here, and then I want to put a picture, and then I want to put some more text. In the old days, we just kind of unleashed them on CK Editor and wished them luck in their efforts to make their content look great and consistent. So paragraphs is a big player when it comes to flexibility in your content. You can go beyond just articles. You can build out your home pages, landing pages. I mean, there's lots of ways you can put that to use for you. Content moderation, Drupal out of the box gives us publish and unpublish. Well, for somebody that's in the business of delivering news, that may not be enough. You may need to have the ability to have drafts and approvals and archives and things like that. So content moderation is really just, it's workbench moderation from the old days that's been ported into Drupal core. And it lets us set up different states for content, different transitions between those states, and lets us define permissions of who's allowed to do each transition. So that also enhances our content authoring experience for media companies. I mentioned Workbench and related stuff here. This is kind of coming into to core a little bit. We've already started using some of this, and the thing is we kind of got backed into a corner because the upgrade path to the core module is not all that clean. So some of this is already starting to show up in 4. Just think twice before you use something like Workbench. Same thing with Media Entity. It does a great job of associating metadata with images and videos and things like that, but it's also coming into core in the older version. Again, it's a questionable upgrade path, so be careful there. Entity Browser is huge. There's nothing worse than an entity reference field that's just the autocomplete widget, and you don't know what you're getting into, in terms of trying to find something. Entity Browser lets us pull it up in a list. We can use views to define what that list looks like, select our content, and it's in there. We can easily reference in it all. So, and I mentioned here too that media is coming to 8.4, which is out now. It's still in the early phases, but there's a lot of things in Drupal 8 we can do to enhance that content authoring experience. A pile of links for you to dig into if you so choose to do so. That was kind of repetitive. We got content in other systems that we need to integrate with our website. And it's in 10 different places in 10 different formats. Not atypical. I mean, you see stuff coming in from 100 different places, video management systems, other content systems, taxonomy coming from places, social data, wire stuff. So Drupal is really well positioned when it comes to consuming data and providing data. And it gives us a lot of different ways to get things done. There's a built-in Guzzle HTTP client if you really just want to write something directly from scratch. That does a great job of being able to go and grab a piece of content via HTTP, parse it up, and use it however you want to do it. So if you wanted to go that route, you can do that. Migrate, we tend to think of as something we use when we build a site and pull in content from an older site. But you can also, it really works well for ongoing ingestion of content. We actually have some things that uses the Migrate API to do that. Again, this is now in core. It's another one of those things that they've brought into core. It frees you up to focus on just mapping data and things like that instead of all the technical stuff about communicating with other websites. RESTful web services, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but it allows things to post to our site too. So with a little bit of security in place, we can even have content being pushed to our site versus pulling it. Serialization API, that's a great tool to be able to transform data from XML to an associative array, back out to JSON or however we want to do it. It does a great job of that. You can't forget authentication. Usually when you're hitting some of these endpoints, there could be some HTTP basic authentication or OAuth or things like that. We've got some great tools in Drupal via contributed modules that lets us get that done. When I was doing the research on this, I ran into this external entities module, which I thought was a pretty cool concept, that you define the entity in Drupal like you would a node or whatever, but instead of the data living in a MySQL database, it lives at an endpoint somewhere. So there could be some use cases where that could come in handy in the future. And then I mentioned aggregator just because it's built into core, and it really is just an RSS aggregator. It'll pull in an RSS feed, let you shuffle it around however you want, and spit it back out in a different form. So for consuming external data, I mean, we're well positioned to be able to do that. We've got a couple different options to do it. Again, a giant pile of links for you to dig into if you choose to do so. We also need content on this website to be shared with other external systems. And of course, it's got to be delivered to 10 different places in 10 different formats. Same story here. I mean, we're in a good spot to be able to do this. Of course, the more things you have on either side of this data transfer, the more complicated it gets. And if we're building an API for somebody else to use, we've got to make sure we think ahead and try to avoid changing things in the future, because you can't have another site start consuming your data and then you change your mind about how you want it to look or how you want it to be structured. So planning is super important still. Don't build an API and let word of mouth be the way that this gets passed down from generation to generation. Take the time to write the documentation and do it right. So the RESTful Web Services module and API that comes with Drupal is one of those game-changing adds to Drupal 8 over what we had before. It's kind of like what I mentioned with Migrate API. It kind of frees us up from all the details of exchanging data and lets us focus on what our API needs to do, which in the case of providing external data, all we really care about is taking data from our system, mapping it to fields that's going outbound, and leave it at that. We shouldn't have to be dealing with all the extra side things that deal with delivering that data. This RESTful Web Services does a great job of that. It's built into Drupal, and it's way worth looking into. For example, if we were building an API from scratch and we built it with JSON and then suddenly we had a requirement to do it with XML, well, we kind of got to start refactoring our code. Using RESTful API, well, it's already built in there. You just pass it a different argument and you get a different format back. So a lot of that legwork is done for you. You don't have to fool with it. Even with that, I mean, it doesn't do everything automatically. You still have to write plugins for it, resource plugins for it, to tell it how to handle post requests and GET requests and things like that. So there's still plenty of custom development involved in getting that done. If you've got some simple data that's going out that's not going to be super complicated, Views does leverage the same API, REST and Serializer API stuff to generate content. So it's possible to push out data that's just simple views with no big coding required. And if you must, you can always write a solution from scratch, but with all these other tools here, I'm not sure I would even worry about doing that. And secure these endpoints too. You don't want people just spamming your API, and I mean, it's probably a good idea to throw some security on top of that. Just as we did when we were consuming data, there are tools out there in the contributed ecosystem that handles adding security to your API endpoints, so that's really good. And this could be some super intensive stuff when it comes to serving up this API data. Don't return 10,000 items in an API endpoint. Build it to where it's efficient and performant. So once again, we got to consider performance right from the top. I might be talking quick here, but I got like 12 minutes and I got 12 slides, so we're gonna keep jamming. I've got links for you here for that. And this is just representative of what kind of happens when you get to exploring this. It gets deeper and deeper. By the way, we deliver content to 50 countries in 25 different languages, and we need to be able to allow multiple translations of a single article. No problem there. We've got it covered with Drupal 8 again. It does require planning. I mean, what are you just going to be translating content that's shown to the user? Are we translating the back end? Who's going to be responsible? Planning. Languages module lets us identify languages to the system, and it does language negotiation, so it kind of tries to figure out which language to serve to which visitor based on the rules that you've defined. Interface translation deals with those things that editors and admins on the site see, so whether or not that needs to be translated, interface translation can do that. pretty much think the T function. Anything that you run through T is going to be affected by this interface translation module. That API also lets you do translations in PHP, Twig, JavaScript. You're not limited to just doing it there in PHP. If you've got a ton of languages, it can get kind of tricky when you go to manage all these translations. I mean, if we've got 25 languages to manage, it takes some extra thought to do it. There are some tools online that make it kind of easy to manage the PO files that are associated with this. We use one that's called PO Editor that really does a good job of letting you edit content, edit your translations in a collaborative way. When it comes to content translation, though, this is more or less, my feedback has been that services don't really do a good job of translating large chunks of content. So it's a lot of times it's human involved, but content translation gives us the user interface that makes it easy for editors to translate content. All built in, all of these things right here is all built into Drupal core. There's no contributed modules right here. And you can do a lot of definition when you configure it of what gets translated exactly. And even configuration settings like site is down for maintenance can be run through the translator. A pile of links for you. And then, it can get crazy after that. We've kind of covered bringing data in, pushing data out, good content authoring, translation, but then you get into the craziness. Each country has its own domain name and editorial staff who want their own home pages, landing pages, and articles. Well, this starts to sound like a nightmare. Now we're not talking about one website. We're talking about a whole passel of websites. Passel. I ain't used that word in a while. So this might be a candidate for multi-site right here. And again, when you introduce something like this, you got that much more planning to deal with. It could be a big lift for your ops team. It's going to impact how you do QA. It really complicates the deployment process and managing configurations. It can be a real challenge to get it right. Having a shared code base, well, that's got its benefits, but at the same time, when you put together a multi-site setup, you are creating a single point of failure. If something goes wrong with one, next thing you know, something's wrong with all 50. The last thing you want to do is deploy some code and kill 50 websites all at once. So it's not always the best choice, but in sites where the functionality between each instance is almost identical, it does make sense sometimes to do it. And you've got alternatives. You don't have to use multi-site to get this done. We've got a lot of fancy CI tools these days that can help us deploy to multiple places. Somebody like Pantheon, for example, they don't even support multi-site. They have their own tool that they use to get the same type of functionality. So there are cases when we might want to use multi-site in a situation like this. A big pile of links for you there. Okay, so not only do we got all these different sites, but they all wish to manage their own content, but they also want to be able to pull in content from these other instances and publish them on their site. So maybe there's an article in Spain that I want to publish in Germany, and I want to be able to pull it from one place to another. And some of these are real requirements from real clients. So, Drupal, we've demonstrated, sorta, that Drupal is very capable of consuming data and providing data. And in the requirement that we just had where we'd like to share data amongst all these different multi-site instances, there's nothing saying we couldn't have a Drupal instance whose sole job is to bring in content from everywhere and make it available to any site who wants it. And in the remote sites, we might even build some interactive functionality that lets them say, hey, give me articles on balloons that were published the last 7 days. And they have that. They would have the option then of pulling it into their system, translating, and publishing it on their own. So Drupal don't always just have to be something that serves up websites. It can be tools that we put in the middle somewhere to manage certain other aspects of the bigger picture. Cool. There was not really any links associated with that. That's more of a conceptual thing. We need to surface content via a search function that needs to support text search, auto-suggestion, and be able to filter results by topic. So once again, Drupal comes to the rescue. We know that the core search functionality is pretty limited. It's not the greatest thing in the world. But with Drupal core comes Search API, which is a good framework for connecting to enterprise-grade back-end search engines like Solr or Elasticsearch And there are contributed modules that work with Search API to do exactly that. Once again, not all of them are very mature in their development, but something like Solar works as of today. And there's also contributed modules that extend the functionality of the search capability with things like auto-suggestion, filtered and faceted results, location-based results. So all of these things here that we're talking about, this is really more or less a matter of configuration versus having to sit down and write a bunch of custom code to make this work. You might encounter some challenges getting it done. I mean, it's kind of a black box when you're talking to something like Solar. You've got a few configuration options and everything else is just kind of magic. So there are times when you might have a few challenges to get it to work, but we can deliver high performance, valuable search results to visitors without having to write a whole lot of custom code. A lot of more links of things you can dig into. So you can, just based on the list of links that we have after every one, there's a lot of pieces that go into this, and scratching the surface makes it sound like it's super simple, but it's pretty complicated, yet very capable to do the things that we're being asked to do. Of course, we need to advertise, and we need to track visitor behavior and how they got here and how they share stuff on social media, and you get clients very excited and they start having requirements that are coming out. This is not really a very Drupal specific thing. I mean, I haven't really run across any contributed modules that address the crazy out of this world requests that we get for advertising. And most of it happens on the front end. So Drupal usually just plays the small role of delivering JavaScript, allowing people to put in some configuration options, dropping a few related data items onto the page so that the JavaScript for the ad stuff can do its thing. And for analytics, I mean, we have used some contributed modules in the past for that, but again, most of it's front end. Drupal doesn't really play a big role. We tend to just do our own implementations for analytics and advertising. It's kind of the same for social media. There's a bunch of social media modules out there. Most of them hadn't caught up to Drupal 8 yet. And really the most important thing about social and SEO to me is having the right metadata on the page. Metadata module does a great job of that. It's a contributed module. You've probably run across it once or twice before. So getting the right metadata on the page, OG tags, Twitter tags, your standard stuff. Structured RDF data is being used a lot more now to give it a little more oomph in terms of how other systems understand your content. And if you got to go down the road of having a sitemap, why have a site if you don't have a sitemap, right? The old XML sitemap module is not all that great in Drupal 8. I don't know what happened there. It seems like they just changed a couple things and ported it over, but simple XML sitemap does a great job of doing a sitemap for you to help out on your SEO stuff. Put a few things in here. This is a little, like I said, less Drupal sensitive, so it is something we have to deal with from time to time. Sometimes we get asked, hey, we use single sign-on for all our content management systems. Is that something we can do? Well, absolutely, it's something we can do. Another area where, surprisingly enough, you're going to have to do a little planning. What are you authenticating against? What kind of permissions how are you going to establish your permissions? What protocol is going to get used? I mean, it gets complicated because there's a lot of different flavors of single sign-on. You got your OAuth stuff, your SAML stuff, your OpenID. It just kind of depends on whether you're authenticating against something that has a certain standard already in place. It becomes easy. You don't have any decisions to make right there. You just kind of set it up to work with what they have. There are, again, many contributed modules out there. Some of them are quite not as mature in Drupal 8 as others. For example, Simple SAML is a PHP library that does this. Simple SAML PHP authentication is a module that uses that library. So for single sign-on SAML, you're kind of covered there. OpenID Connect is one I've used a lot in the past. That does a great job using that protocol. And Drupal can even serve as an authentication provider. So it's not even, it's not something that you have to rely on some other service to manage your single sign-on. You can do it with Drupal. So single sign-on, check. Drupal can handle that too. A few little single sign-on related links. And look at that, I'm going to hit my time too. So, wow, we just love our new site. It's hard to believe you finish it in half the time and way under budget. That's what we do, right? Do you think you could build a site for my brother-in-law's air conditioning company. So anyhow, Drupal is way more than capable of handling. I'm not sure that Monty has sent me too many things that we haven't been able to do in Drupal. Some of it you smash your head into the wall, a few more than others. But we can accomplish a whole lot with Drupal right out of the box, and if we start throwing some contributed modules in there, and it becomes way more than capable of doing the things we need. As long as we, do our proper planning, we don't write crappy code, we can deliver good websites. And don't forget, too, as part of that planning, you can't code your way out of a poor performance. I mean, if you get to the end and you realize you have a site that doesn't perform well, it's kind of too late to fix that. It takes great teams to build great websites. Great tools like Drupal 8 make it that much better. So, Drupal, baby! And that's it. So, thank you very much. I can finally take a breath now. I don't think I've breathed in 20 minutes. So yeah, if you guys got questions, feel free to shoot them at us. We'll be happy to try to answer them for you. Yes, sir.
Are you guys doing
Composer?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Report?
Yes.
Kind of curious, and if anybody else has an opinion on this, what is the consensus on Composer for the core and custom modules? I've heard a couple of different options. With Composer, the thing I get is that you don't commit your core stack. You let Composer handle it on the install. But with
Do you commit core?
I do not. No contributed modules, no core, no libraries, whether they be PHP libraries, JavaScript. All that happens in our build process. So we use different tools for different projects, but essentially the CI tool that we use uses Composer to reassemble the site every time it builds. So if I deploy 10 times in one day to dev, 10 times during that day, it goes and pulls down Drupal, all the contributed modules, all the libraries, jams them in there, and supplements what we've put into the repo. So our repos contain theme stuff and custom module stuff, and that's about it. So the repo itself,
You are doing custom stuff.
our custom stuff we do commit.
Now, I've heard or read that if I had to bring it up, it probably would take me a while to find, but I was under the impression that they were committing, they were building their custom modules in separate repos, and then having Composer require those in. There were custom modules for that project. I felt a little weird and wanted to see if that was something that was actually.
I mean, I suppose in the right scenario, we don't do that, but I suppose if you had some custom modules that were more universal in nature, that weren't specific to that site, that repo, that you might want it to live somewhere else, so that if I want to use it for customer A, I can just put it in Composer and pull it down for that, and I want to use it for customer B, I can do the same thing. A lot of the stuff that we've done thus far with 8 and Composer has been custom modules that are specific to that implementation. So there could be a use case where you would want it to live outside of the repo. And it would work the same way. I mean, after that, at that point, as long as you got it living somewhere, you could pull it in just like you do anything else. I mean, the Composer stuff is great. I like it. And I mean, it reduces the size of what you have to manage greatly. And nobody's going to go in and hack any contributed modules or hack core, because it's not there to, you're not going to have a developer that secretly goes into core and makes a little change to get his code to work. It's impossible to do. So it works pretty good. And like I say, with all the CI tools, I mean, a lot of things like this that felt unreachable before are just, it's not that easy, but it's pretty easy.
Yes, sir. What's your experience been like using media in Drupal 8? I know in Drupal 7 it was a very awkward, shaky experience, especially transitioning between different versions of media and how it would break content depending on what version of media you're using. Has it gotten any better?
Yeah, I haven't really. I mean, the components called media that they're pulling into Drupal core right now, it's kind of ongoing. It's not really ready for prime time just yet. But what we use is a combination of media entity for images, so that not only do we got an image living out there in managed files, but we also got photo credits and captions and things like that that's stored with the image. And then if you stack on top of that entity browser, So what happens is when you reference an image in a node, for example, we don't just have an image that gets referenced. We reference that media entity, and the entity browser, through views, lets us customize how that selection screen works. So we're not really using it. We've got kind of some home-baked solutions that do pretty much the same thing. I mean.
So how do you manage like external media sources like video content and stuff?
I mean, you know, the example I can use right now is for video. Where we have a video entity that we've defined that, just like media entity, I mean, it's all the metadata that's surrounding the video, and the video is actually served from somewhere else. So.
And you guys develop internally, or?
No, it's frequently a third-party platform like the platform or Oyala or somebody else will be the video management system they'll use. We'll have a feed that will ingest, which will include all the metadata, including the location of the asset to be served. And that gets ingested into Drupal, and we manage that entity.
Correct. And the same would be apply to images, where yes, it would be kind of a custom solution that knows that particular image lives somewhere other than your file system. So using media module in Drupal 7 and 6, I use the head smashing my head into the wall. I've done that before with media. So, you know, just because a module is kind of talked about a lot, don't mean you have to use it. I mean, I feel like now we've got even more options for developing custom stuff that does what we want it to do without always relying on some contributed module that may have a lot more overhead, something like media, than we really need. You know, really, we just want a way to select an image and use it more than once. So there's alternatives. Cool. Yes, sir.
Actually, two questions. The first one relates back to you said you use any browser to hook a lot of that content into large piece of content, essentially. Have you used any embed? If so, have you done the work on trying to solve the problem with like making an image fit in space? What we ran into is that it's not very customizable once you actually have like essentially a short code that says, hey, this is what the image is supposed to be. You can't really decide, you can't really change it. Have you run into that? Or?
You know, I'm a lot more of a back-end guy than a front-end guy, and I've used Media Embed before, but something like, say, what we're doing with Entity Browser and Media Entity, we've got image styles that Drupal generates, and then we use some React components. And these front-end guys, they go do their JavaScript magic, and they understand, based on the size of the container, which of the image styles to request. So it kind of happens on the front end, and Drupal is just serving up whichever one is asked for based on the size of the container that's available for the image.
The other question I had was a tool that I found pretty helpful in translations was actually it's called Translation Management Tool, TMGMT.
I ran across that. I think I got a link to it in there.
Oh, you did? I was actually wondering if that was something you guys use. It seems to be designed to pull together big pool of translators. And I don't know if that was something you would see on like centralized translation sites that sort of ties all the websites together, or do you do it on local level or something like that?
Don't have any first-hand experience with that. All the translation stuff we've done has been human-only type of translation where it's not really augmented by any service. But I did see that TMGMT module, and it was probably the most promising looking of any of the modules I saw like that.
It's pretty significant.
And a lot of these modules, I mean, I think that one might be one too. You know, a lot of these modules, and we use them all the time, and it's like, you know, I remember when 7 came out, we had a thing amongst ourselves that dev is the new stable. Because, I mean, we're using, you know, you're going to run into lots of beta and alpha, and, I mean, we try not to use dev modules, but I think that one might be one that's kind of in an alpha beta state. So it's coming along, though. I mean, these contributed modules are starting to show up a little bit more frequently. It makes the composer stuff you were talking about a lot more difficult because every week everything's out of date and you got to go update it. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you go in and messing with Composer to get the latest greatest, it can be a little bit taxing with so much going on. Any other questions? Cool. Well, if Drupal can do all that stuff with these kind of sites, it can do most everything. That's my 2 cents on that. Cool. Well, we appreciate your time for sure.